My family faked an emergency to get me to babysit while they went to Vegas. There's a moment that hits you hard, not because something happened, but because something clicked, a quiet realization. Like the moment you realize the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally don't. Mine came on a Thursday afternoon in the middle of what was already a soul-draining week. Deadlines were piling up at work. I was behind on rent. I hadn't grocery shopped in a week, which meant my meals had devolved into peanut butter on crackers and expired yogurt. My phone had a cracked spider webbing across the screen from a clumsy fall 2 nights earlier. And sleep? I've been running on caffeine and anxiety for days. That kind of week, where you start mentally preparing yourself for bad news before it even shows up. So when my phone rang and I saw Mom flash across the screen, I already felt something drop in my chest. She was breathless, panicked. Her voice was trembling and uneven. She told me something had happened to Grandma. She said she'd fallen badly, and they were taking her to the hospital right then. It was serious. They needed someone to take care of the kids immediately because Amy, my sister, had to go too. She asked if I could get there right now because no one else was available. And that was it. There wasn't a second to think. She didn't give me time to ask questions. She just kept repeating that they were in a rush and needed me. Now, I didn't hesitate, not because I'm naive, but because it was Grandma. She practically raised me. My mom worked long hours when I was little, and Grandma was always the one who fed me dinner, ran her fingers through my hair when I had trouble sleeping, or showed up to school events when no one else could make it. When people talk about second moms, that was her. The idea of her getting hurt, seriously hurt, threw me into autopilot. My brain shut off all decision-making processes and my body just moved. I was at the grocery store at the time, finally trying to restock the fridge after days of pushing it off. I left the cart right there in the aisle, half filled with stuff I'd actually managed to budget for. Canceled the job interview I had lined up for that afternoon, an interview I had desperately needed and spent days rehearsing for. I even forgot to pick up a prescription I'd been out of for 2 days. Just ran. The drive to Amy's house felt like one long blur. My hands were shaking the entire time. My stomach was in knots, picturing Grandma alone in a sterile hospital room. What if she had hit her head? What if she couldn't walk? What if this was the beginning of something worse? I hit every red light like the universe was mocking me. Every car in front of me felt like it was purposely driving slower just to piss me off. I remember gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles ached by the time I pulled in her neighborhood. Amy lives in this cookie-cutter suburb where all the houses look like variations of the same catalog. Bright lawns, beige sidings, fake decorative shutters. I've been there dozens of times before, but this time it felt alien. Like I was walking into a set on a TV show. When I parked in front of the house, I noticed the driveway was empty. Strange, but not impossible. Maybe they had all rushed to the hospital in one car. I didn't think much of it at the time. I knocked, waited. No one came. I knocked again, louder this time. The kind of knock you do when you're stressed and kind of angry, hoping someone will hear the urgency in it. Still nothing. That's when I noticed the paper, taped crookedly to the front door. A scrap of notebook paper fluttered slightly in the breeze. It was written in bright pink marker, the kind my niece uses for her school projects, and the handwriting was unmistakably Amy's. And when I say the words didn't register at first, I mean it literally. My brain saw the letters, formed the sentence, but my body rejected the message. Like when you hear something so absurd, your mind decides to double-check, because surely you're misunderstanding. It was a thank you note. It thanked me for coming last minute to watch the kids. It said they were sorry for the rush, that they didn't know who else to call, that the food was in the fridge, that they'd be back in a few days. And it ended with a bubbly love you and 2 heart doodles. I stood there in stunned silence. Everything around me, birds chirping, wind rustling trees, a neighbor's dog barking faintly, sounded muffled. Like I'd slipped into some alternate version of reality where nothing quite made sense. A few days? I hadn't agreed to a few days. I hadn't agreed to anything. My chest felt tight, but not in the panicked, worried for Grandma kind of way. This was something else entirely. A creeping realization that I'd been manipulated. Played. I reached for the spare key under the doormat, same spot Amy always kept it, and let myself in. The second the door opened, the smell hit me. That mix of cereal, spilled juice, and whatever else happens when 3 small kids are left unsupervised for more than an hour. The living room was a disaster. Couch cushions on the floor, toys everywhere, a half-eaten banana on the coffee table. The TV was blasting a cartoon I didn't recognize, some loud, high-pitched thing that made my head hurt. Then the kids came running. All 3 of them. My 2 nephews and niece. They were barefoot. One was still in pajamas, even though it was the middle of the afternoon. My niece had marker all over her hands and a half sticker stuck in her hair. They were surprised, but not alarmed to see me. Just excited. Apparently, their mom had told them I'd be coming. They assumed I was there to stay. They didn't know anything about Grandma. Didn't seem the least bit worried. That's when the pieces started sliding into place. And then I checked my phone. I texted Mom on the drive to the house. Asked how Grandma was doing. No reply. Tried again after I got in. Still nothing. Then I called. Straight to voicemail. Same with Amy. Something in my gut twisted. I wasn't just being ignored. I was being avoided. I opened Instagram, and there it was. Mom's story. Her and Amy at the airport earlier that morning, champagne in hand. Then a photo from their hotel. A poolside shot. Mom in oversized sunglasses, Amy in a bikini, both holding drinks. The caption said, "Vegas, baby," followed by clinking glasses, a slot machine emoji, and that obnoxious dancing girl emoji Amy always uses. The next slide was a boomerang of them cheering at a blackjack table. Then another of them with some guy who looked like he worked security at a nightclub, arms around both of them like they were old friends. I just stood there, phone in hand, kids yelling in the background, trying to process what the hell I was seeing. They lied. They lied to me about Grandma. They used Grandma. They faked a whole emergency just to trick me into babysitting for an impromptu vacation. And they knew I wouldn't question it. They knew the only way to guarantee I'd drop everything and come running was to dangle Grandma in front of me. And it worked, because I loved her, because I trusted them. And in that moment, standing in my sister's house with 3 unbathed, sugar-hyped kids screaming about cereal and cartoons, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't just anger. It was grief. Grief for the version of my family I thought I had. But I wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. It's strange how betrayal doesn't hit you all at once. You'd think it would. That there'd be this clear breaking point, like a glass shattering, that lets you know exactly when your trust is gone. But no, it sneaks in like a slow leak, trickling through the cracks before the whole thing finally bursts open. That's how it felt standing there in Amy's living room, with the truth dripping into my brain one unbearable drop at a time. They lied. That much was clear. But it wasn't just the lie. It was how calculated it was. They knew exactly how I'd react. They knew I'd drop everything, no questions asked, if I thought Grandma was in danger. And they used that. They didn't just trick me. They weaponized the one person I cared about the most. I stared at the Instagram story again, like it might change if I looked long enough. But there they were, my mom and sister, smiling, sun-kissed, completely unbothered. They looked happy, like nothing in the world was wrong. Like they hadn't just torn a hole through whatever remaining trust one had in them. The house was loud, not with real noise, though the kids were shouting, the TV blaring, and some toy was singing a glitchy version of the Wheels on the Bus on repeat, but with a kind of emotional noise. The kind that hums in your ears when your thoughts are so loud you can't hear anything else. I was there. I was in it. I was watching the kids now, whether I wanted to or not. The damage was done, but I felt numb. Not angry yet, just stuck in this loop of disbelief. I checked my texts again. Still nothing from Mom or Amy. It had been nearly an hour since I got there. And then, finally a ping. A text from Mom. 4 words. "Don't be so dramatic." That was it. A few seconds later, another text followed, longer this time. She said they just needed a break, that it was only a couple of days, and that I was so good with the kids anyway. She added that Grandma was fine, and I shouldn't worry. Like that made it better. Like that excused any of it. Then Amy chimed in, texting me like this was all a joke. She said I was overreacting, that babysitting for a bit won't kill me, and that they'd bring me something from the hotel gift shop. She even had the audacity to add one of those upside-down smiley faces at the end, like she knew it would piss me off and thought it was funny. I just sat down on the arm of the couch, letting the chaos swirl around me. One kid was tugging on my sleeve, asking for juice. Another was climbing on the back of the couch like a mountain goat. The youngest was trying to feed crayons to the dog. I didn't move. I just kept hearing that text in my head, "Don't be so dramatic," like it was some kind of catchphrase. Like this whole thing was a harmless misunderstanding and not a deliberate manipulation. Let me back up for a second. This wasn't the first time they'd done something like this. Not exactly this, but similar. A year ago, my mom once told me there was a plumbing emergency at Amy's house, and they needed me to pick up the kid from school and take them overnight. I left work early, showed up with snacks, tried to make it fun. Later, I found out there was no emergency. Amy just had a date, she didn't want to reschedule, and didn't want to pay a babysitter. Another time, I was told there was a family emergency, only to find out they needed someone to stay home and sign for a furniture delivery because they had spa appointments. Each time I brushed it off, told myself it was no big deal, that they were stressed, that they didn't mean harm. But deep down, I think I knew. I just didn't want to believe it, because believing it meant accepting something darker about my own family, that they didn't respect me, that they saw me as someone to use, not someone to care about. But this was different. This was beyond inconsiderate or selfish. They faked a medical emergency. They used Grandma, the one person who'd never once treated me like an afterthought, as a prop to make sure I'd fall in line. I couldn't decide if I was more hurt or furious. Maybe both. And somewhere beneath all that emotion was something worse. Shame. Shame that I'd been fooled. Shame that I'd let them do this to me again. Shame that even now, sitting there in the middle of their mess, I was still taking care of things. Still cleaning up after them. Still playing the role of the dependable, responsible one while they were off sipping margaritas and posting about needing a break. I got up and started cleaning. Not because I felt generous. Because the mess was overwhelming. Crumbs on the floor. Juice stains on the counter. Dishes piled up in the sink. One of the kids had spilled cereal and milk under the table, and the smell was starting to turn. So I did what I always do. I handled it. Fed them. Wiped their faces. Turned off the blaring cartoon and put on a quieter one. Changed the youngest kid's shirt because he somehow got ketchup under his chin. Got them settled with snacks and a board game. And then I sat in the kitchen. Just sat there. I didn't have a plan yet. I wasn't thinking about revenge or consequences. I was just letting it sink in. Every time I'd said yes to my family, it had chipped away at me. I'd said yes when they needed a sitter, when they wanted help moving, when they couldn't make it to a school play. I'd said yes to things that cost me time, money, peace. Said yes to keep the peace. To be the good sibling. To not rock the boat. But it was never a two-way street. They never asked if I was okay. Never offered help when I needed it. Never even thanked me properly. They just assumed I'd be there. I'd say yes. That I owed them my time, my energy, my availability. And when I didn't, I was dramatic, ungrateful, difficult. I knew then I had two choices. I could keep being that person, the one they could always rely on, even when they treated me like garbage. Or I could stop, and maybe, for once, let them deal with the fallout of their own decisions. I looked at the kids, completely oblivious. Just being kids. None of this was their fault. But they weren't my responsibility. Not like this. That's when the idea hit me. And with it, a flicker of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Clarity. The kind that comes when you finally stop excusing people's behavior and start seeing it for what it really is. I wasn't going to scream or make threats. I was going to take control, and they wouldn't even see it coming. Because the real emergency was about to begin. And this time, it wasn't mine to fix. The thing about being the reliable one in the family, the one who always shows up, keeps their cool, keeps the peace, is that people start to believe you don't have a breaking point. That no matter how much they push you, you'll bend but never snap. They thought I'd just deal with it. That I'd keep the kids entertained, cook a few meals, maybe get frustrated and send a few annoyed texts. But ultimately, I'd clean up their mess and wait patiently until they waltz back in from Vegas with tan shoulders and cheap souvenir mugs. That I'd forgive and forget. Because isn't that what I always did? But they didn't realize something had changed. This time, they hadn't just crossed the line, they'd torched it. And I wasn't interested in playing the role they'd written for me anymore. After feeding the kids dinner, chicken nuggets, applesauce, and carrot sticks, because that's what was in the fridge, I got them into pajamas, brushed their teeth, and let them watch one more cartoon before bed. They were surprisingly easy to manage once the noise settled down, which only reminded me that they weren't the problem. They were just pawns in their mom's selfish game. Around 9 p.m., I had them tucked in a bed, stories read, lights dimmed. And then I sat at the kitchen table, phone in hand, replaying everything. Still nothing from Amy except one more text, hours ago, saying the kids should be in bed by 9 and that they love you so much. Like that excused everything. I didn't reply. I just stared at the screen, then opened my contacts and scrolled until I found his name. Mike. Amy's ex-husband. The kid's dad. Now that was a card I'd never played before. Not because I couldn't, but because I never wanted to get involved in their drama. Amy and Mike had split 3 years ago in a messy divorce that left everyone scorched. They shared custody, but Amy always seemed to do whatever she wanted with the schedule, and Mike, either too tired or too checked out, let her. We weren't close, but we were civil. At every birthday party, school event, or random drop-off, he'd say hi, thank me when I helped wrangle the kids. I always figured he appreciated that someone else was trying to keep things semi-functional. And now, he needed to know what was going on. I didn't call. I texted, short and direct. I told him Amy had left town, that she hadn't told me when she'd be back, that I was watching the kids unexpectedly, and it had been nearly 12 hours without a single proper check-in from her. I didn't even have to say the words custody violation. He replied almost immediately, I'll be there in 30 minutes. I stared at that text like it was a release, not just from this situation, but from years of guilt, obligation, and emotional manipulation. 30 minutes. While I waited, I cleaned up the last of the dishes, packed a quick overnight bag for each kid, just the basics, and wrote a note. Not for the kids, not for Mike, for Amy. It was short and clear. I told her I wasn't doing this anymore, that if she needed help, she could try asking instead of lying, that if she wanted a break, she could try planning ahead instead of faking an emergency, and that I wouldn't be here waiting when she got back. No more guilt-tripping me. No more pretending I was part of family that only called when they needed something. The doorbell rang. Mike stood on the porch with a female officer beside him. He looked tired but furious, not in a shouty way, more like the cold, focused kind of fury that builds when you realize your kids have been put in danger without your knowledge. I opened the door slowly, making sure the kids were still asleep upstairs. I stepped outside to talk. He asked if Amy had given me written permission. No. Had she told me how long she'd be gone? Nope. Did I know exactly where she was staying in Vegas? Just what I saw on social media. The officer nodded as I explained. She took down everything, my texts, the note on the door, the screenshots of the Instagram story, the timestamps. She didn't say much, but I could see the expression change on her face as the picture formed. Eventually, she asked if I was okay with them entering to get the kids. I said yes. A few minutes later, Mike gently carried his youngest daughter out in his arms, her head resting on his shoulder. The officer followed with the other two, sleepy and confused but calm. They didn't cry. They didn't panic. I think they were just used to moving from one house to another. Before he left, Mike thanked me. I didn't expect that. He looked me straight in the eye and said he was sorry. Said he didn't realize how chaotic things had become. That he'd assumed Amy had things under control and that the kids were okay. I told him it wasn't his fault, but also that he needed to pay attention now. That I couldn't keep stepping in to fix things. He nodded, said he would. They left, and then the house was quiet. Truly quiet. No cartoons, no toys clattering, no sugar-high kids bouncing off the walls. Just silence. I sat down again, same spot at the kitchen table, and just breathed. It hit me then how much tension I'd been carrying. How much pressure I'd let build inside me over years of trying to be the dependable one. The peacekeeper. The problem solver. Now I was done. Done playing that role. Done bending every time someone demanded it. I didn't even feel guilty. I thought I might, but I didn't. Not even a little. What I felt was free. Like I'd finally let go of a weight I never should have been carrying in the first place. And then I blocked them. First Amy, then Mom. No warning. No big message. Just gone. Blocked their numbers. Blocked their socials. Set filters on my email so anything from them went straight to trash. I left the house that night. Locked up behind me. Left the note on the counter where they'd see it. And I didn't look back. I didn't sleep much, but I didn't cry either. Not like I expected to. Instead, I made tea, watched the sunrise from my apartment window, and waited for the chaos to find them. Because eventually, they'd come back from Vegas, hungover, probably broke and completely unprepared for what was waiting for them. And this time, they'd have to clean up their own mess. I wasn't going to be their scapegoat anymore. That version of me, the one who showed up, said yes, swallowed his frustration just to keep the family machine running, he was gone. They just didn't know it yet. The next morning, I woke up to a different kind of silence. Not the hollow kind that follows an argument or hangs in the air after someone slams the door, but a steady, peaceful stillness that made me realize how long it had been since I truly felt calm in my own space. I didn't have to brace myself for a screaming kid or another passive-aggressive text from Amy or some guilt-tripping voicemail from Mom. My phone, for the first time in what felt like forever, was quiet. No babysitting, no drama, nothing. And I wanted to keep it that way. Still, I knew what was coming. I'd handed the kids over to their father, brought in a police officer, documented everything, and left a note that, while not cruel, was unmistakably clear. I wasn't going to be part of their manipulation anymore. So yeah, I knew the blowback was inevitable. They'd return to a house with no kids and no warning. Just my handwriting and the sound of their own selfishness echoing off the walls. It should have made me nervous, but instead I felt grounded. For once, they were the ones who didn't have control. I wasn't dumb. I knew they'd call me the second they got back. I figured they'd blow up my phone, leave dramatic voicemails, maybe even try to show up at my place. That's why I changed my locks the same day I left Amy's. It wasn't paranoia. It was self-preservation. When people show you they don't respect boundaries, you stop pretending they'll honor them. It wasn't until the third day that the first crack in the silence came. A knock on my door. I didn't answer. Instead, I watched through the peephole as my mom stood outside, clutching her phone in one hand and a Starbucks in the other, looking like she was gearing up for a speech she practiced in the hotel lobby mirror. She knocked again. Waited. I just stood there, quiet, watching. After about 5 minutes, she slipped a folded paper under the door and walked off. I waited a beat before picking it up. It was a handwritten note, her go-to when she wanted to seem thoughtful but couldn't control the narrative with a real conversation. It started with the usual fluff. I love you, your family. We just needed a little break, like it was some kind of misunderstanding we could patch up over coffee. But then it turned. She said I'd gone too far, that bringing the police and Mike into the situation was unnecessary, that I'd embarrassed them, created drama, and ruined a chance for the family to reconnect. They were still trying to spin it, still trying to make this about me being dramatic, instead of them being manipulative. But that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was the sentence buried in the middle, the one that made my stomach turn. You've always been so reliable. We just assumed you'd be okay with it. That was it. That was the entire root of the problem, laid bare in one sentence. They didn't ask me. They didn't check on me. They didn't care how I was doing. They just assumed. Assumed I'd put my life on hold. And when I finally did, they called it betrayal. That's when I knew I'd made the right decision. I folded the letter back up, slid it into the trash, and went about my day. Later that evening, I got a text from Mike. It was the first real update since that night. He said things had escalated quickly after he got the kids back. CPS had been contacted by the officer, standard procedure when a parent leaves kids unsupervised for multiple days without formal arrangements. Amy was under review for a temporary suspension of custody. He was filing for emergency full custody pending a court date. He didn't sound vengeful, just tired. Tired of the instability. Tired of the games. I told him I understood, because I did. Amy wasn't just irresponsible. She was reckless. And this time, her recklessness had consequences that couldn't be cleaned up with a sorry and a souvenir t-shirt. I wish I could say she took it seriously, that she realized what she'd done and made an effort to own it. But no. The next morning, she texted me from an unknown number in all caps. How can you? And then about 10 more messages in quick succession. Everything from feeling guilty about the children, crying to ranting about family loyalty, and claiming that I had ruined her life. I didn't reply. I'd spent too many years replying. Too many years swallowing my feelings, rationalizing her behavior, and trying to maintain peace in a family that only ever valued me when I was useful. Not anymore. Instead, I went to work, had coffee, took a walk, called a friend I hadn't seen in months, laughed over nothing for a while, felt the kind of calm I hadn't realized I was missing. Later, I updated my number, not out of fear, out of choice, because every time I ignored a toxic call or deleted another manipulative message, I was reclaiming something I didn't even know I'd lost. Autonomy, peace, freedom from obligation dressed up as love. And when the silence stretched on again, when the text stopped coming and no one knocked on my door, I finally felt the last piece click into place. They thought I'd just deal with it, but I didn't. I set a boundary. I stuck to it. And when the fallout came, I didn't flinch, because I wasn't their doormat anymore. They were free to spiral, but I was finally free to